If I was that mother and some random ass man came up to me and started talking to my blind 7-year-old daughter about his magic stick, you know, he would be so lucky that he was already in a hospital to begin with. Welcome back to a new video. I hope you guys are doing well. I know I am. I have a chair to sit in now. We're off the floor. We're quite literally moving up in life. We got the LED lights in the background. They did come with seizure mode, so that's cool. Lately, I've noticed myself kind of falling out of love with my favorite genre, which is horror, because every novel I've picked up has kind of felt the same. And for some genres, that's not a big deal. I read Fourth Wing and I felt like I had already read the exact same story like 10 times prior, but that book did very well. But horror is a genre that's all about subverting tropes and surprising the reader. And so when I start to feel like things are getting derivative, that's not a good sign for horror. So I turned to Eric LaRocca's newest novel, Everything the Darkness Eats, in an attempt to revitalize my interest in horror, because while I didn't love Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, which is their super popular novella, I did appreciate what they were going for. It felt fresh. It felt like the book took risks, and not all of those risks worked, but there was still an attempt. And I figured that if I didn't hate LaRocca's early work, they've been in the game for a long time by now, so they've probably just gotten better and better, right? When I saw this book at ye olde Barnes & Noble, I was especially motivated to purchase it because of the endorsement on the cover by Brian Evanson, who wrote a little novel called Last Days, which is a psychological thriller about an amputation cult, and I think it is just one of the best books I've ever read in the horror genre or out of the horror genre. But now when people ask me what I think about Brian Evanson, I'm gonna say I love his works, I don't love his recommendations. Because this book was a mess. Not the artistic title, not the fun little cover, not even this waste of ink little brick design on the inside cover. Let me find a chapter page. Not even this could distract me from some very glaring issues that, quite frankly, made me question if this book saw an editor before it got published. But before we get into all of the issues, as always, I think it's important to give credit where credit is due and talk about some of the good parts of this book. LaRocca always incorporates queer people, queer representation into their books, which is a nice change of pace, especially because horror can be shockingly heteronormative sometimes. But in this book, of our 3 leads, one is a gay Muslim man, one is a physically disabled bisexual man, and one is a little ambiguous, but I would probably say a bisexual or pansexual older man. No lesbians in this book, but the gang leader who tries to kill one of our main characters does drive a Subaru. So, close enough, right? Another positive is, although I feel like LaRocca's writing takes itself way too seriously at times, when it pulls back and when it leans into the campiness of the story and stops taking itself so seriously, that is when the book is at its best. That is when the internal musings and the character interactions become really fun and fresh and give that exciting new kind of feeling that I got glimpses of when I was reading Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke. Aside from those things and the name and the cover design, I regret to say that I don't have a lot of other compliments to give this book. So if you are Eric LaRocca, which you're not, I'm not that popular of a reviewer, or if you really enjoyed this book, not trying to shit on your opinions. This is just my opinion and some of the grievances I had about the book. So let's get into the book properly. First of all, on the praise page, them, which I assume is like a queer-focused magazine, has endorsed the book by saying the following: Eric LaRocca is considered the Beethoven of queer horror, composing nuanced queer stories that really touch a chord. Hilarious thing to say, not only because I have never heard Eric LaRocca being called that, but also just why Beethoven? I can just picture the person who wrote this sitting down being like, this story really touched a chord for me. Who else touches chords? Beethoven. I also have to point out, because it's hilarious, that this book is dedicated to Eric LaRocca's mother. If my child, I would be less than thrilled, is all I'm gonna say on that front. Everything the Darkness Eats follows 3 main characters: Malik, Hart, and Ghost. I told you this was so camp. Our first character is Malik, and I want to apologize in advance if that's the incorrect pronunciation. I have a friend named Malik, and I know the Arabic pronunciation is a little more like Malik, but I couldn't stop myself from just saying Malik over and over again. So I'm sorry, I'm gonna try, but I think my American pronunciation is gonna slip through. Malik is a police officer, though he may as well just have been a civilian, because him being an officer adds like nothing to the plot or his character. But anyways, he is a police officer who, along with his husband, suffers a homophobia motivated assault and seeks vengeance on the perpetrator. So that is his plot line. Of all the characters in this book, honestly, most of them are about as deep as a puddle, Malik included actually, but his character is aided some by his relationship with his husband Brett, which I thought was very sweet and useful in making both of these characters feel a little more like actual people. Malik is also a Muslim man, but much like him being a police officer, I do not think the detail of his religious affiliation really affected the story very much. The fact that he struggles to reconcile his faith and his sexual orientation is told to us, but never really shown. Main character number 2 is an elderly man named Hart Crowley. Yeah, he is the most difficult character for me to understand. In the prologue, he reveals an ability to make people's heads explode. So clearly he possesses some kind of magical capabilities, but it is unclear to me whether that had anything to do at all with the main plot of this story, which I'll talk about more later. But basically it's about him capturing some kind of entity and trying to steal its power for himself. And I don't know if he always had these powers or if they're strictly linked to the deity. His character is very ambiguous. We are told that he is old yet handsome, and aside from that, I really can't tell you many character traits he possesses. He is the antagonist, and his story in the novel is about him kidnapping people and using them for nefarious rituals. Last, and certainly not least, there is Ghost. Ghost Everling is simultaneously the most uninteresting yet amazing mess of a character I have ever read about. He is a 33-year-old widower, and his main characteristics are that he is useless and stupid, but everyone in this book really seems to like him, so. Ghost lost his wife in a car accident, which he blames himself for. It's the most cliche horror way for a character to be killed. They're driving in the middle of a storm, and Ghost is driving, obviously, and Haley's sitting in the passenger seat, and she's like, pull over, we're not gonna make it. Ghost is like, no, we can make it. Haley is also 8 months pregnant at the time, of course, and, you know, there's that moment where Ghost looks over, and then he looks back, there's a car. You know, they fall off the road, they run into a tree, she dies. But she dies because right before this happened, she takes her seatbelt off. I guess it was tightening on her stomach or something, but I'm like, girl, you're 8 months pregnant driving in the middle of a storm. Keep your seatbelts on. Even if she weren't 8 months pregnant, just keep your goddamn seatbelt on. So I know Ghost blames himself, but it's not entirely his fault, just not to be too crass, but Ghost does next to nothing in this book. He just gets told by other people what to do, and he uses his few moments of agency to do really dumb shit. And because of that, he was my favorite character in this novel. Usually following characters, I would like to talk about the plot of the book, but this was one of those books that I use the phrase tasted like a metal spoon, and I want to talk about why I feel that way. First of all, what do I mean? Tasted like a spoon? I use that term to describe a book that spoon feeds us a lot of information and simultaneously gives us nothing of substance. Hence, it's like someone spoon feeding you, but there's no food on the spoon. Something like 20% of this book was comprised of sentences like this. Page 20. Ghost had quickly realized that grief had not only changed him, but had remade the world the same way a child might manhandle a clump of wet clay. The second clause of that sentence is meaningless. The emphasis, right, of the sentence is that Ghost's whole world has been broken down and torn apart by this grief and put back together in a really ugly and misshapen way. So the image of the child holding clay to me doesn't get that point across at all. If anything, a child building is usually something we associate with things coming back together, the hope of youth shaping the world in their own hands, something like that. It doesn't strike me as things getting ripped down and torn apart, and this is very sad. And the thing is that even if LaRocca had chosen a better simile that got the point across better, I still question the need for that second clause in the sentence at all. You could just say, Ghost had quickly realized that grief had not only changed him, but had remade his entire world. That gets the job done just fine. Page 26. Of course, he had occasionally entertained the idea of seeking out new companionship, especially late at night, when rooms in the house felt especially vacant. As if they were tombs. It feels like this book is being narrated by two separate narrators. The first is like the one telling us all the important stuff, and the second is like their little brother who just chimes in every now and then with the most vacuous little similes and metaphors. Page 48. He had once imagined he and Haley being buried together when the time came, their bodies bound in a permanent embrace the way certain types of creeping plants clung to walls until the unforgiving laws of time shriveled them both to nothing more than dark stains. That one was especially egregious to me because it just kept going. Another quirk of LaRocca's, or I don't know if I can call it a quirk, I think it's just a mistake, is that there are a few instances in which they just used expressions incorrectly, like in the prologue, so not setting a great tone for the rest of the book, but right in the prologue there's a scene of Mr. Crowley climbing into a dig site and inquiring as to what the team found, and there's the line, "Where is it?" Mr. Crowley asked the director, panting like a dog in heat. Is he aroused? Because when people say like a dog in heat, that doesn't mean the dog is literally hot. It means it's in a state of arousal. My last major complaint about the writing is pertaining to the dialogue, because it is so awkward sometimes. In this book, I don't know why, maybe LaRocca really resonated with these two characters because they felt so normal, but if there's a scene of Malik or Brett, or especially one involving the two of them, the dialogue is actually not bad. For example, there's a cute scene of Malik coming home after he had to stay late at work, and he's just anticipating his husband being mad at him for being so late. So he walks into his home and Brett is sitting in the bathtub with a glass of wine, millennial core, and Malik comes home and he's like, "Are you mad at me?" And Brett says, "I was mad 3 hours ago." Okay, and now I'm just drunk. Brett also has this hilarious line about how he thought he was doing a good job of flying under the radar as a gay man because he added flannel to his wardrobe. Honestly, Brett is the best character in this book, and he's barely in it, so. Aside from a couple of exchanges, though, the rest of the conversations in this book are just expo dumpy or the characters will phrase things in a very weird way so that they can set up a question and a dramatic answer reveal. There's this little girl in the book named Piper who's 7 years old and she's blind, and she's just so ridiculously intelligent and polite, and it makes me think LaRocca has never spoken to a 7-year-old. At this point, I'm going to take you through a very thorough play-by-play, so if you don't want spoilers, as if I haven't already spoiled half the book, but this would be your time to click off. In the prologue, we are introduced to, oh, by the way, the prologue is set in Wales in 1994. We are introduced to Hart Crowley, who is supervising an excavation site, and the people at the site find some old relic that Mr. Crowley says is an invocation, and he sees this and gets really excited about it and decides that he wants to be the only one to know about this discovery. So he goes around the excavation site and makes everyone's heads explode. Then we transition to the present day and we meet one of our protagonists whose name is Ghost. So he pulls up to a hospital and then he has this weird little exchange with the receptionist. Name, she barked at him. Ghost Everling. How do you spell it? She asked. Like the thing that goes boo. Yeah, that would be cute if she was only talking about your first name, but she's clearly asking about your entire name. The secondhand embarrassment I feel for Ghost throughout this whole novel. He really thought he ate with that response, the thing that goes boo. After that, he goes to the waiting room and he meets a woman named, what is this woman's name? I already forgot, like Gemma or something. Yes, Gemma, oh my gosh. So he goes to the waiting room and he meets this woman named Gemma and her daughter named Piper, who's there for a broken arm, and it also seems like Piper is blind. Piper pops her balloon by accident and it seems like she's really sad about this. She starts to cry, and so Ghost goes over to comfort her, which sounds really sweet, except the way he does it. So Ghost asks, "What's your name?" And the little girl's like, "Piper." "Princess Piper, that's exactly who I was told to find," Ghost said. "I'm so happy I found you because I think I have something you'll want." Ghost flourished his cane, pushing the tip into the palm of Piper's hand so she could feel it. "You see, I have what's known as a magic stick. It grants wishes," he explained. Obviously, he's talking about his cane, and the only reason that he's pushing it into her hand is because she's blind and can't see it. But still, if I was that mother and some random ass man came up to me and started talking to my blind 7-year-old daughter about his magic stick, you know, he would be so lucky that he was already in a hospital to begin with. Gets even worse too, because he's telling her to, like, you have to rub the tip and make 3 wishes. So yeah, Ghost, heart of gold, but as we see throughout the book, he's just not very intelligent. In the next couple of chapters, we learn that old people in particular, or at least people that, like, they don't have a lot of family, or people feel like the kind of people that no one would miss, are starting to go missing around this town. The town's name is Henley's Edge, and it's not really a mystery as to who's doing it because we see Hart Crowley in chapter 3 abduct someone. We see him take her to his house, which is filled with all sorts of weird religious memorabilia, and we see him encourage her to go down into the cellar and look at something, but we don't quite see what's in the cellar yet. Then we go back to Ghost for a little bit, and we hear about the car accident that he was in, which we already talked about. He's obviously very upset about it, very, very sad when our horror movie wife dies. Horror book, I guess, but you know. And then finally in chapter 5, we get introduced to Malik. We learn that he's a police officer, that he's Muslim, but that he's also gay. We also learn that he has very homophobic neighbors, that he's never really felt totally safe in this neighborhood, and a character detail that never gets expanded upon. Brett wants children and Malik doesn't. Now, that's really interesting because in literature, when I read about gay couples, I feel like the character conflict is always that both of them, united, really want kids, but the outside world is making it difficult for them to do so. Rare is it that I see one partner really wants kids and the other doesn't. And I think that would be a really interesting thing to delve more into, especially because there's probably, married gay couple out there that don't really want kids, but they probably feel a lot of societal pressure to adopt or find a surrogate or something just because they can now. Kind of like when I was learning how to drive, I hated it so much, but I was literally at the wheel of my car like, women in Saudi Arabia aren't allowed to drive, so I have to drive. It's not logical, but it's the whole sense that like you have this newfound privilege of being able to do something, so you have to take advantage of it even if you don't really want to. But that comes up once, never touched on again. Then in chapter 6, someone throws a brick through Brett and Malik's window, and it has die, and then the F word, the homophobic slur written on it. So they call the police immediately, which is a good thing. You always want to make a report when something like that happens to you. And the captain, Malik's boss, kind of victim blames them, basically. He gives this analogy about how his wife has a beautiful diamond necklace that he bought for her, and it's so beautiful, but he would never allow her to wear it out into public because it might attract the wrong kind of attention. I actually thought this scene was really well done, and that whole idea of like, well, it's your fault that people are being bigots towards you because you're comfortable existing out in public. How dare you? So that was actually really well done. And then it's like immediately ruined by this line. He thought of promises made to his husband, passion squeezed to the size of a child's hand glove and folded neatly into a pocket to be long forgotten, a livid current of white water approaching and threatening to drag everything he ever loved out towards the infinite depth where it would never be seen again. That's all one sentence. In chapter 7, we learn that Ghost is in a little bit of financial trouble. A debt collector comes to his house, and I just think it's funny that this debt collector character is the second well-dressed, dapper, older gentleman in this book. It's him and Mr. Crowley. It's just funny that there's two of them. Then Hart visits Gemma, who is the woman, she's Piper's mother, and she's the woman that Ghost kind of clicked with at the hospital. Because, when random men come up to you and start talking about their magic stick, you just gotta get in on that. She and Ghost were gonna hang out, but Hart gets to her first, and he tries to make her a sweet deal, saying something about like, I can help you heal your daughter, and I have magical powers. He demonstrates this by cutting his hand open and then magically healing it right in front of Gemma. So Gemma follows Hart to his home, and we get the same thing where this time she goes into the cellar and she sees something amazing, but we're not told what it is yet. And then it's reported that she has disappeared. Then we switch back to a very upsetting scene of Malik coming home, and someone has broken into his house, and Brett has been brutally attacked. I think he's been like beaten with a crowbar or something, but miraculously he's alive. And then we get to the hospital, and Malik has this moment where he feels very empty inside. He feels apathetic, and it scares him. And I thought this was going to be the point where LaRocca was going to make some commentary on like how he's been forced to subdue his true self as a gay man, and he's been forced to like not show any compassion or love towards his partner out in public, and now that's starting to creep into other facets of his life. Like he feels like he can't express himself at all. But again, it's this little like LaRocca loves to leave little details here and there and then never expand on them. Then we go back to Ghost. He gets picked up by Hart after he's grocery shopping. Hart almost runs him over, and and then Ghost is like, I'm gonna get in this man's car. Of course, I'm gonna let this random stranger drive me home. So people in this town, a little too trusting, I think. They drive towards Mr. Crowley's house, and we finally get to see what's in the cellar, and it's God. And you're gonna think that's a really anticlimactic way for me to introduce it, because it was. Any God scene in this book is so anticlimactic. It's just like Ghost walks down the stairs and he sees this shimmering thing. It's cosmic horror, which sometimes work and sometimes just means we get this vague collection of adjectives, like this shimmering, effervescent shape, and it's like hard to feel any fear. Anyway, Ghost sees this and Crowley's like, it's God. And Ghost is like, what's God doing here? That's so weird. And Hart is like, well, I need to return him to heaven. So, I forgot to mention, also in the cellar are all of the missing peoples, and they are all sitting down, like praying, they're kneeling down facing God, and they're praying to this entity. And Hart is like, I need someone to get involved in a ritual for me, but all of these people, they saw God and they just like got lost in the sauce, and they just started praying, and I can't shake them out. They're just in a trance praying. And he was like, but you, Ghost, you hate God because he took your wife and unborn child. So that's why you don't feel this sudden urge to submit to God and start praying. So I want to use you for the ritual. And Ghost is like, I don't think so. And then Hart is like, I will pay you $500,000. And Ghost is like, sure, I'll do whatever you want. From this point forth, the chapters continue to switch back and forth between Ghost and Malik, but I'm just gonna take you through one of theirs because it gets a little confusing. So, Ghost agrees to stay over at Mr. Crowley's house while they complete a series of rituals, and it's very confusing. I don't know if there's a rhyme or reason to the particular rituals that him and Mr. Crowley do. At one point, one of the cult members, which I don't even want to call them cult members because they're like being hypnotized, but one of the missing persons gets up from where he was praying and he was like, I need to cover myself in honey to appease God. And Ghost is like, that's a little weird, what's up with that? And Hart is like, oh, it has roots in this old Middle Eastern ritual. We need to get him honey. And Ghost is like, okay, I'll go to the store. Well, Ghost goes to the store, and who does he see? None other than Piper, Gemma's blind daughter, who I guess is just walking around the store without adult supervision. And Ghost, being the genius man that he is, Mr. Magic Stick, he gets the idea, I think it would be so great if she got to see her mother, who is stuck in a catatonic state in this really weird stranger's basement. So he goes over, he takes Piper, he doesn't like pick her up, although I wouldn't put it past him, but he just like convinces her to follow him. So they get in a taxi. Ghost doesn't have his own car, so now he's leaving a paper trail of child abduction, takes Piper to Hart's house, takes her down to the cellar, and shows her mother. Obviously very upsetting. I guess the point of this was to show her that her mother was still alive, but obviously very upsetting that she can't understand Piper at all, and there's clearly something very wrong with her. And then Ghost takes her and drops her back off at the grocery store. What was the point of any of that, both inside the novel and on a meta level? After that, rituals keep picking up. I don't really get the significance of any of them. There's one where Ghost has to like go into a bathtub while Hart recites some things over him, and he like pushes his head under the water and he almost like dies. Some joke to be made here about Ghosts dying, but low-hanging fruit. The big reveal, which everyone saw coming, is that Hart is not trying to return God to heaven. He's actually trying to take God's, or whatever entity this actually is, he's trying to take its power for himself. And Ghost is not really helping out with the ritual as much as he is supposed to be the final sacrifice. So eventually, this is all revealed. Oh my gosh, this creepy old man who's keeping all these people in his basement, he's actually a bad guy. So Ghost almost dies. He almost So Ghost is about to be stabbed to death with Hart Crowley's cane, not like a sacrificial knife, but his cane, which he sharpened the point of, which kind of slay. But they are interrupted by a knock on the front door, or the doorbell ringing, or whatever. And he goes up, and it's none other than Malik. So what's been happening with Malik this whole time? The most unnecessary plotline in existence. That's what's been going on this whole time. Malik wants to take revenge on the people who almost killed his husband, Brett, which, understandable. One of his neighbors, Deus Ex Machina, comes over and is like, oh, I know who tried to kill your husband. It's actually the entire neighborhood is so homophobic that they have all banded together and they have solicited the help of this gang. And the gang leader's name is Saint Fleece. The saint part, I kind of get, we'll talk about it in a minute, but Saint Fleece is his name. The neighbor gives an address of a bar that this gang likes to hang out at, and Malik goes down to this bar and he recognizes the red Subaru. The Subaru is such a big part of this book, and I love me a good Subaru. So he goes down, he sees the red Subaru, he slashes the tires, and some of the gang members hanging out around the bar, they're like, yo, Fleece, someone's here to see you. And so Saint walks out and he's like, we got a problem here. And I don't know what Malik being a police officer had to do with this novel at all, because I thought like, oh, he's a trained police officer, this is so cool, I'm sure he has all of his guns, he's gonna take out these homophobic assholes. But no, he gets swarmed by the gang members, beaten up terribly, and then they abduct him and like beat him up and sexually assault him. And I'm like, what is going on here? What does this have to do with the main plot line? Why do we need to see this person suffering so horribly? At one point, while Malik is being tortured, Saint tells him that he's doing all of this because in his youth he was molested by a gay man, and so he feels like by hurting Malik and Brett, he is stopping them from hurting other children. So Saint is a very layered villain, clearly bigoted idiot, but still that's kind of an interesting villain origin story. Could be a whole couple of chapters in itself. My issue is that it takes place, that whole reveal is about 2 pages long, and LaRocca doesn't really invest enough time into talking about the dangers of this kind of mindset. And you could say, well, hey, the danger is what we're seeing right now. The danger is some people become so bigoted and so blindsided by hatred that they're willing to go continue a cycle of evil and violence and do horrible things to other people. So I kind of get it, but at the same time, it felt like there was some nuance missing in having this whole reveal over with in 2 pages, not really spending any time where Malik and Saint talked, and then never seeing this character ever again. So I don't know. I have some conflicted feelings, basically. Saint stabs him. I do like that his name is Saint. It's so awful and ironic, and I do like it. But it, again, makes me wish that some of the themes when it comes to being true to one's religion versus to one's sexuality, and what has the institution of Islam and the institution of Christianity, what have they done to gay people? It's not really explored in a nuanced way, that's all I'm going to say. But at least we get a character named Saint Fleece. So after that, Saint stabs Malik over and over again, and somehow he survives. Props to him. The gang dumps his dead body into a ravine, and this man crawls his way out and makes it all the way up to Hart Crowley's house. And then this is like the last 2 chapters. So he collapses on Hart's doorstep. Hart brings him down into the cellar. So finally, our main 3 characters are all in one place. And then the most ridiculous thing happens. Throughout the entire book, Ghost has been described as having something which LaRocca calls a wraith attached to him. And this entire time, I thought the wraith was an allegory for the grief that Ghost felt, the grief and the guilt as a result of losing his wife. Turns out, it was an actual wraith. Like, it was a little creature that sat around his neck and whispered mean things to him. I was like, oh, it's like a metaphor for a noose. It sits around his neck. It tells him horrible things about himself. No, it was an actual creature. And right before Hart tries to kill Ghost for a second time, the creature like places its hands on Hart's face and like sucks his soul out and kills him. I'm not done. Because after that happens, all of this in the span of like 5 pages, then God is like God again. And it starts talking to Ghost through telepathy, of course. There's like a line like, Ghost realized they could speak through telepathy. Of course, naturally. So they start having a conversation, and God is so grateful that it's like, oh, let me do something for you, kiddo. Like, what do you want? And Ghost is like, well, I want Haley back, but I also feel really sad about this random man. And God's like, oh, you mean Malik? And Ghost is like, yeah, I feel really bad about Malik. He looks like he's in pretty bad shape. And God's like, I can't do both, kiddo. I know I'm God and everything, but you gotta choose. And for some reason, Ghost chooses Malik. He's like, I wanna revive him and send him home. And so God does that. I guess God really tired from the events of the last 200 pages because he made Ghost pick for some reason. So God fixes up Malik and sends him home, and he also wipes his and Brett's memory so that they forget all of the suffering that they've endured throughout this book. So really, the main 3 characters don't ever meet because Malik is like unconscious and then he forgets everything. And then the book ends. And then there's an epilogue where Ghost and Gemma and Piper are hanging out on Christmas and like drinking hot chocolate, and Ghost is like, maybe life isn't so bad. And that is the book. So why are we here? Yeah, what was that all about? Clearly this is a book that's very open to interpretation, and LaRocca kind of hands us a few themes that we might want to consider. Clearly, religion and sexuality is a big thing. Something about grief. That's all I got, honestly. I think if I sat down and like really tried to dissect this book, maybe I could come up with something. But for now, it will just stand as a very confusing book with prose that I didn't really jive with, and an extraordinarily anticlimactic ending. I have so many questions, like, why was this not 2 different books? The stories within are so distinct and they don't touch one another at all. So what was the point of having them both in this novel in the way that they were? Especially with all of the jarring jumping back and forth. Just write 2 different novellas. I think Eric LaRocca's strength is really in their shorter stories, and yeah, I don't know. This book was a miss for me, but I don't know. For some reason, I still kind of like Eric LaRocca. Maybe it's just because some of the authors I've been reading lately, especially the splatterpunk ones, it is so clear what gets them going, if you know what I mean. Like, certain authors on here, you just know that, especially in scenes of women getting like tortured to death, they are just a little bit too happy to be writing some of these scenes. With Eric LaRocca, at least it feels like there is a genuine attempt to weave all of this violence and brutality into a greater theme, to ask some of the bigger questions. But unfortunately, Eric and I are both asking questions now. Now we're just both confused. But I don't know, maybe I will give this author another shot. At least this book felt fresh, you know? I think that's all I have to say. I'm just kind of rambling at this point. So thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in the next book review. Bye.